The sun beat down on the dusty main street of Harmony Creek, Texas, a town where life was as predictable as the daily sunrise. It was here, in front of the weathered town hall, that a small, somber wedding was about to take place. Caleb Hayes, a man hardened by years of working his sprawling cattle ranch, stood waiting. At 35, he was a widower, his heart still heavy with the memory of his late wife, and he was marrying out of necessity, not love. The ranch needed an heir, and Caleb needed a mother for his two young children, Lily and Sam. His gaze was fixed on the rickety carriage pulling up, and his jaw tightened. From the carriage stepped Eleanor Vance, a woman whose every curve seemed to defy the town's rigid standards of beauty. She was big, soft, and dressed in a plain, ill-fitting white dress. Whispers followed her, a chorus of hushed judgment from the few onlookers. She met their stares with a quiet dignity, her eyes the color of a summer sky, holding a sadness that mirrored Caleb's. As she reached him, her voice was a low whisper, almost lost in the Texas breeze. "You'll regret this marriage. I'm fat," she said, her words a mix of a warning and a plea. Caleb looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. He didn't see a burden. He saw a person wounded by a world that had always judged her. Without a word, he took her hand. It was soft, surprisingly so, and warm. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, not desire, but a simple, human connection, a promise of a different kind of life. And as he held her hand, he realized he couldn't let go. The brief ceremony was a blur. They exchanged vows in a flat, monotone way, two strangers binding their lives together out of obligation. As they signed the marriage certificate, Eleanor's hand brushed against his, and she flinched, as if expecting a cold rejection. Instead, Caleb gave her a firm, reassuring squeeze. He still didn't know this woman, but he knew what it was like to be an outsider. He knew what it was like to be alone. Now they were in this together. As they walked out of the town hall, a single, clear-eyed look from Eleanor told him everything. She was strong. She would face this town and his silent ranch with her head held high. And in that moment, for the first time, Caleb didn't feel the cold weight of duty, but a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. He was a rancher, accustomed to taming wild horses and vast landscapes, but he was beginning to realize that the person he had just married might be the most complex and beautiful wilderness he had ever encountered. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible narratives. The Hayes Ranch was a world away from Harmony Creek. The house, a sprawling two-story structure, was silent and filled with the ghosts of Caleb's past. His children, Lily, a withdrawn 8-year-old, and Sam, a boisterous 6-year-old, eyed Eleanor with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. She was the new variable in their quiet, grief-stricken lives. Eleanor, for her part, approached her new role with a quiet grace. The ranch hands, a rugged and cynical bunch, watched her with the same skepticism as the townspeople. She was an oddity, a city woman who seemed to have no place in the harsh landscape. But Eleanor didn't complain. She started with small things. She organized the pantry, a task that had been neglected for years. She mended torn clothes and baked bread that filled the house with a comforting aroma. Caleb watched her from a distance. He saw her patience with Lily, who refused to speak to her, and her quiet resilience when Sam would mischievously hide her shoes. He saw her working with a purpose, her large hands kneading dough with a strength that belied her soft exterior. He was used to the raw power of the land, the muscle and sweat of a man's work. He was not prepared for the quiet, enduring power of a woman's care. One evening, he found her sitting by the fireplace, reading to the children. Lily was nestled against her side, her small face finally relaxed. Sam was sprawled on the floor, listening intently. Eleanor's voice was low and soothing as she read from a worn-out book. When she finished, she looked up and caught Caleb's eye. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a simple, tired kindness. He approached her, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. "You're good with them," he said, the words feeling clumsy on his tongue. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her entire face. "They're good children, Caleb. They just need a bit of kindness." That night, for the first time since his wife's passing, Caleb felt a sense of peace in his own home. The house still held the past, but Eleanor had filled it with something new, something alive. He had married her to fulfill a duty, to provide a mother for his children. He was beginning to see that he had gotten something much more valuable, a partner who was not only capable, but also genuinely kind. The ranch was still his, but the house, for the first time, felt like a home. The peace was short-lived. The West was not just endless skies and quiet ranches, it was also a place of constant threat. The next morning, Caleb woke to the sound of barking dogs and the angry shouts of his ranch hands. A section of his fence had been cut, and a dozen head of prime cattle were missing. The ranch had been hit by rustlers. Caleb's anger was a physical thing, a tight knot in his chest. He saddled his horse and called his men, ready to ride out and track the thieves. He had always handled such problems with brute force and swift action. As he was about to leave, Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, her face serious. "Wait," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Do you know where they might be headed?" Caleb scoffed. "They'll be taking them to the Red River crossing, same as always. They won't get far." Eleanor shook her head. "No, not this time. A few days ago I was walking by the creek and I saw a new trail, a fresh one. It heads north toward the mountains. It's too well hidden for a casual trail, and it wasn't there before." Caleb stared at her, disbelieving. What would a city woman know about tracking? But as he looked into her eyes, he saw a keen intelligence, an observant nature he had never expected. He paused, a moment of hesitation that was new to him. "I'll take a small scouting party and check it out," he said, his voice tinged with grudging respect. "If you're wrong, we've lost a whole day." Eleanor didn't flinch. "I'm not wrong. They're smart, Caleb. They know you expect them to go to the crossing." He rode out, his men following his lead, a small group of 6. He decided to split his force, sending half to the Red River and taking the others north, against his better judgment. 2 hours later, just as Eleanor had predicted, they found the stolen cattle herded into a hidden canyon, waiting to be moved under the cover of darkness. The rustlers were surprised, captured with ease, and the cattle were recovered. When Caleb returned, the ranch hands were in awe. Eleanor was no longer just the rancher's soft new wife. She was the woman who had saved their herd. That night, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, Caleb stood on the porch and watched Eleanor tuck his children into bed. He had always valued strength, but he was learning that strength came in many forms. Hers was a quiet, almost invisible kind, but it was as powerful as any physical force. He'd married her for his ranch and his children, but he was beginning to see that she might just be what he needed for himself. The Texas winter arrived with a brutal ferocity that year. A cold front, unlike any in recent memory, swept through Harmony Creek, bringing a blizzard that trapped everyone in their homes. For the Hayes Ranch, it was a test of survival. The ranch hands were isolated in their bunkhouse, and the main house became a haven against the howling wind and biting cold. The children, confined indoors, became restless. Sam's boisterous energy was a fire in the small living room, while Lily's quiet withdrawal intensified. Eleanor, however, seemed to thrive in the isolation. She had an inner peace that soothed the frantic household. She told the children stories of her life in the city, of bustling streets and grand buildings, and she taught them games she had learned as a child. Caleb watched her, fascinated, She was not the same woman who had stepped out of that carriage. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a quiet confidence. She managed the household with an efficiency that surprised him. She rationed the food, kept the fires burning, and made sure everyone, including Caleb, was warm and fed. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Caleb found her sitting on the floor, stitching a tear in Lily's dress. Her face was illuminated by the firelight, and she was humming a soft, unfamiliar tune. He sat down across from her, a rare moment of quiet intimacy between them. "You're not what I expected," he admitted, his voice low. Eleanor looked up, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "And what did you expect, Caleb?" He paused, searching for the right words. "I don't know. Someone different. The town. They said things." She nodded, not with bitterness but with a weary understanding. "I know what they say, but I'm not just what they see, just as you're not just a tough rancher." He was silent for a moment, struck by the truth of her words. He had always prided himself on his self-sufficiency, on his emotional walls. But in the past few weeks, she had managed to chip away at them without him even realizing it. She had made his house a home, and his children feel safe. She had been a quiet force of nature, and he was beginning to realize that he had a deep and profound respect for her. The storm raged for 3 days, but inside the Hayes house, something was shifting. The coldness that had settled over the home was melting away, replaced by the warmth of a new, unexpected family. Caleb knew that his life had changed the moment he took her hand in front of the town hall. But it was during this storm that he realized that he had not just found a wife, but a partner, a friend, and perhaps a love he never thought he'd find again. He had married her for his ranch, but he was beginning to think he would have married her for her alone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the next thrilling parts of this story. With the spring thaw, new life returned to the ranch, and with it, a new relationship bloomed between Eleanor and the ranch hands. Her reputation as the woman who had saved the cattle herd had spread, and they no longer viewed her with suspicion. Instead, they saw her as a trusted, if unlikely, ally. Eleanor found herself spending more time with them. She learned their names, their families, their hopes and fears. She listened to their stories of long cattle drives and dusty saloons. She, in turn, shared stories of her own, of life in a city where buildings scraped the sky and carriages moved without horses. It was a strange blend of two different worlds, a bridge built with respect and shared humanity. Caleb observed these interactions with a quiet astonishment. He had always been the sole authority, the unquestioned leader. He had expected Eleanor to be a silent figure in the background, a shadow in his life. Instead, she had become a central figure, a beacon of a different kind of strength. The ranch hands, who had once grumbled about every new rule, now listened to her suggestions. They had seen her quiet strength, her resilience in the face of judgment, and her keen intellect. One afternoon, as Caleb was mending a fence post, old Jed, a grizzled ranch hand who had worked for Caleb's father, approached him. "Caleb," Jed said, his voice gruff, "that wife of yours is something else. She's got a way with people, a way of making them feel heard. We're better for having her here." Caleb nodded, a flicker of pride in his chest. "I know, Jed." He had never been one for grand gestures or public displays of affection. His love was in his actions, in the care he gave to his land and his children. But he was beginning to feel a new kind of love, a deeper, more complicated emotion for the woman he had married. It was a love born of respect, of admiration, and of a shared journey. That night, as the children slept soundly, Caleb found Eleanor sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. He sat beside her, the wooden planks creaking under his weight. "The men, they think highly of you," he said, his voice soft. Eleanor turned to him, her face serene in the moonlight. "They're good men, Caleb. They just need a bit of kindness. Everyone does. He reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear. She laced her fingers through his, a natural, comforting fit. He had married her to fill a void, to provide a mother for his children. But in an unexpected and beautiful twist of fate, she had filled a void in his own heart, a void he hadn't even known existed. The marriage had started as a practicality, a business arrangement. Now it was becoming something real, something profound, and something to be treasured. Just as Eleanor was beginning to feel a sense of belonging, a shadow from her past arrived. Her estranged sister Clara, a woman as thin and sharp as a needle, appeared at the ranch. Clara was a woman of refined sensibilities, accustomed to the social circles of Boston, and she looked upon the dusty ranch and its inhabitants with thinly veiled contempt. Clara's presence was a jarring disruption. She made pointed remarks about Eleanor's weight, her rustic clothing, and the backward life she was living. She spoke of her own upcoming marriage to a wealthy businessman, a union that she believed was a perfect match, unlike Eleanor's. "You always did make poor choices, Eleanor," Clara said one afternoon, her voice dripping with condescension. "Marrying a simple rancher, living in this hovel. You should have married a man of means, someone who could have taken care of you properly." Eleanor's face remained placid, but Caleb saw the hurt in her eyes. He had never seen her so vulnerable. His protective instincts, long dormant, flared to life. He stepped in front of Eleanor, his broad shoulders a barrier between her and her sister. "This is not a hovel, Clara," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is our home, and my wife is not simple. She is the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Clara flinched, taken aback by his fierce defense. Eleanor, her hand on Caleb's arm, looked at him with a mixture of shock and gratitude. He had never spoken so passionately, so protectively. In that moment, he wasn't just the man she was married to, he was her partner, her protector. The confrontation marked a turning point. Clara, seeing that her barbs had no effect, left a few days later, but the damage was done. Eleanor retreated into herself, the old insecurities she had so carefully buried rising to the surface. She began to eat less, to wear loose, baggy clothes, and the light in her eyes seemed to dim. Caleb, who had always been a man of action, felt helpless. He couldn't fight this demon for her. He had to show her, not just tell her that she was worthy. He began to leave her small gifts. A wildflower he had found on his morning ride, a smooth stone from the creek bed. He made sure to sit with her at dinner, to listen to her talk about her day, to hold her hand when they were alone. He had married her to provide a mother for his children, but now he was fighting to keep her, fighting to make her see her own worth. He was a rancher who tamed the land, but he was learning that the greatest challenges were not in the dirt and the dust, but in the heart, and he was determined to win this one. The tension on the ranch was palpable. Eleanor's quiet sadness was a cloud over the house, and the children, sensitive to the shift, grew withdrawn again. Caleb's efforts to cheer her up seemed to fall short. He was a man of few words, and his attempts at emotional support were clumsy at best. One evening he found her in the kitchen, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her face was gaunt, and her eyes, once so full of life, were flat and empty. "Eleanor," he said softly. She flinched, not from his voice, but from the sound of her own name. "I'm not worth it, Caleb," she whispered, her voice cracking. She was right. "I don't belong here. I'm just a big, useless woman in a man's world." Caleb's heart ached. He had to break through her walls, had to make her see what he saw. He walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, and he put his hands on her shoulders. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice firm, but not harsh. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. "You saved my herd," he said, his words a hammer blow of truth. "You made my children happy again. You brought light back into this house. You're not useless, Eleanor. You're the reason this ranch is running as it should. The men, they look up to you. My children, they adore you. I need you." His last words hung in the air, a raw, honest confession. She searched his eyes, looking for a hint of pity, a trace of lies. But she found only sincerity. She saw a man, a strong, silent man, who was finally truly vulnerable with her. Tears spilled from her eyes, but this time they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of a long-held pain finally being released. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time she did not flinch. She leaned into his embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her, his strong arms a shelter against the storm of her past. In that moment, their marriage was no longer a matter of practicality or duty. It was a choice, a commitment made not just in front of a justice of the peace, but in the quiet, desperate honesty of a kitchen. He had held her hand in front of the town hall, and he couldn't let go. Now he was holding her, and he knew, with a clarity that shocked him, that he would never let her go. He was a rancher, accustomed to building fences and corrals, but he was learning that the most important work was in building a life with her, one piece at a time. If you're captivated by this story, make sure to subscribe to our channel for the final part. The summer brought with it the annual Harmony Creek Ranch Festival, a town-wide celebration of the harvest and a chance for the ranchers to show off their best cattle and their skills. Caleb had always participated, but this year he had an added motivation. He wanted to show the town and himself that Eleanor was his wife, his partner, and his equal. He was a man of few words, but he made a point of introducing Eleanor to everyone. He spoke of her with a quiet pride, telling anyone who would listen how she had helped him with the rustlers and how she had brought his children back to life. The townspeople who had once whispered behind her back now looked at her with a new kind of respect. They saw the happy children, the strong, confident rancher, and the woman who had transformed his life. The festival was filled with games and competitions. There was a barrel race, a horseshoe toss, and a pie baking contest. Eleanor, who had always been a talented baker, had made her famous apple pie. It was a simple pie, but the filling was rich with cinnamon and nutmeg, and the crust was perfectly flaky. The judges, a panel of the town's most discerning matriarchs, were a tough crowd, but when they tasted Eleanor's pie, their faces softened. Later that evening, the results were announced. Eleanor's pie won first place. The crowd erupted in applause, and a few of the women, the same ones who had once whispered about her, came up to congratulate her. Eleanor, her face flushed with a mix of surprise and joy, looked over at Caleb. He was standing in the crowd, a wide, genuine smile on his face. He had always prided himself on his strength and his stoicism, but in that moment, seeing her so happy, he felt a happiness of his own that was deeper and more profound than any he had ever known. He had married her to save his ranch, but he was realizing that she had saved him. She had shown him that life was more than just hard work and duty. It was about finding joy in the small moments, in a shared glance, a whispered word, a piece of perfectly baked apple pie. The festival was a testament to their newfound respect and love. It was a public declaration that they were a family, and that their life together was not just a matter of practicality, but a beautiful and authentic partnership. He had held her hand and couldn't let go. And he knew, standing there in the warm summer air, that he never would. The following months were a time of peace and happiness. The ranch thrived, the children flourished, and the bond between Caleb and Eleanor deepened with each passing day. They were a team, a family, and a true partnership. But the West was not without its shadows. A powerful land baron, a man named Silas Thorne, began to buy up the surrounding ranches, a greedy shadow of progress spreading across the landscape. Thorne was a ruthless man, and he saw Caleb's ranch as the final piece in his sprawling empire. He offered Caleb a generous sum for the land, but Caleb refused. The Hayes Ranch had been in his family for generations, and he would not sell it, no matter the price. Thorne, however, was not a man to take no for an answer. He began to sabotage Caleb's operations. His men cut fences, scattered herds, and blocked the access to the river. The ranch was on the brink of financial ruin, and Caleb, for the first time in his life, felt a sense of utter helplessness. Eleanor, seeing his despair, did not falter. She was a woman who had faced judgment and adversity her entire life, and she knew how to fight. She remembered the stories she had told the children, of a different kind of world, a world where the law was not the law of the gun, but the law of the courts. "We need a lawyer, Caleb," she said one morning, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We can't fight him with brute force. We have to fight him with the law." Caleb scoffed. "A lawyer? This is Texas, Eleanor. A man solves his problems with his own two hands. A man who thinks he can solve every problem with his fists is a man who will lose," she replied, her words a direct challenge. "We will fight him, Caleb, but we will do it on our terms. We will show him that a man's honor is worth more than his money." She contacted a lawyer in the nearest city, a woman who specialized in land rights. Eleanor, with her sharp mind and her meticulous attention to detail, began to document every instance of Thorne's sabotage. She spoke with the ranch hands, gathered their testimonies, and compiled a comprehensive case against him. Caleb, initially skeptical, was amazed at her ability to navigate the complex world of legal documents and depositions. He had always seen her as a woman of the heart, a quiet force in his life. He was learning that she was also a woman of fierce intellect and unshakable resolve. The legal battle was long and arduous. Thorne, with his wealth and influence, had a powerful team of lawyers. But Eleanor's case was meticulously built, and she was a formidable witness. She spoke with a quiet confidence, her voice clear and strong as she laid out the facts. The final day of the trial was a tense affair. The courthouse was packed with people from Harmony Creek, all of them eager to see the outcome. Caleb sat beside Eleanor, his hand in hers, a silent pillar of strength. He had been a rancher, a widower, a father, and a husband, but in the past few weeks, he had been a partner, a man who stood shoulder to shoulder with his wife, fighting for their home, their future, and their dignity. The verdict was a triumph. The judge ruled in their favor, issuing a cease and desist order against Silas Thorne and ordering him to pay for the damages he had inflicted. The townspeople erupted in cheers. Thorne, defeated and humiliated, stormed out of the courthouse, his dreams of a sprawling empire crumbling around him. As they walked out of the courtroom, Caleb turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with a love that was both new and ancient. "You did it, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved the ranch." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "We did it, Caleb," she corrected him. "We did it together." They returned to the ranch, their home. The children ran to them, their faces bright with joy. They were a family, and their victory was not just about the land. It was about the strength of their bond, the power of their love, and the triumph of a different kind of beauty. Caleb looked at his wife, the woman the world had once dismissed. She was still soft, still large, but in his eyes, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He had taken her hand on their wedding day, and he had promised to stay. But in the end, it was she who had taken his hand, and she had led him to a life he never knew he wanted. A life filled with love, respect, and a partnership that was stronger than any ranch fence. He had married her out of duty, but he was spending the rest of his life loving her for who she was, a woman of unshakable strength, quiet dignity, and a love that had transformed his world. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories like this one.